In the gentle, rolling hills of southeastern Ohio, the small town of Cambridge rests under wide, open skies. It was here, on July 18, 1921, that John Herschel Glenn Jr. was born, the son of a plumbing business owner and a schoolteacher. The Glenn household was a modest, wood-framed home on a quiet street, where young John spent his days exploring the nearby fields and streams, building model airplanes, and dreaming of flight. The town itself, with its red brick storefronts and tree-lined avenues, embodied the steady, unhurried rhythms of Midwestern life. In the warm summer evenings, neighbors gathered on porches, and the distant hum of a biplane overhead could stop a conversation mid-sentence. It was a childhood steeped in curiosity and a quiet sense of duty, shaped by the values of hard work and community that would carry him far beyond those familiar horizons. John's fascination with aviation took root early. He devoured stories of World War I aces and spent hours sketching aircraft in a notebook. After graduating from New Concord High School in 1939, he enrolled at nearby Muskingum College, where he studied engineering and took his first flying lessons through a civilian pilot training program. The small college campus, with its ivy-covered halls and grassy quadrangles, provided a nurturing environment for his growing ambitions. But world events soon intervened. The attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941 galvanized the nation, and Glenn, like so many of his generation, felt the call to serve. Within months, he left college and enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps, trading the quiet classrooms of Ohio for the rigorous discipline of flight training. The transition was swift and transformative as he learned to master the complex machinery of warplanes under the vast Texas skies. After earning his wings and a commission as a second lieutenant, Glenn was assigned to Marine Fighter Squadron 155. By 1944, he was flying F-4U Corsair fighter bombers in the Marshall Islands, a chain of coral atolls in the Pacific. The tropical heat shimmered off the airstrips carved from jungle, and the roar of radial engines filled the air from dawn to dusk. Glenn flew nearly 60 combat missions, striking enemy installations and providing close air support for ground troops. His fellow pilots described him as unflappable, a man who approached each mission with meticulous preparation and a calm, steady hand on the controls. On one harrowing day, his aircraft was riddled with anti-aircraft fire, yet he nursed it back to base, landing safely with a damaged wing. These experiences forged a resilience that was not born of bravado, but of a deep-seated belief in preparation and teamwork. When World War II ended, Glenn returned to the United States and served as a flight instructor, but the peace was short-lived. The Korean War erupted in 1950, and he requested a combat assignment, eager to test his skills in the new jet age. He soon found himself flying the sleek, swept-wing F-86 Sabre against Soviet-built MiG-15s in the treacherous skies over the Yalu River. The aerial duels were fast and furious, often taking place at high altitudes where the air was thin and the sunlight glared off the metallic fuselages. Glenn's wingman, future baseball star Ted Williams, later recalled his extraordinary composure under fire. In one engagement, after downing a MiG, Glenn's own plane was hit, and he executed a dead-stick landing on a makeshift airstrip, walking away unscathed. By the war's end, he had flown 63 more missions and earned the nickname MiG Mad Marine for his skill and tenacity. Between the wars, Glenn's life took a deeply personal turn. He married his high school sweetheart, Annie Castor, in 1943, a partnership that would become a cornerstone of his strength. Annie, who faced a significant speech impediment, found in John a patient and unwavering advocate. Their love story, rooted in the same small-town Ohio that shaped them, provided a grounding force amid the chaos of war and the demands of a military career. They built a home together, and with the birth of their 2 children, Glenn's sense of purpose expanded beyond the cockpit. The letters he wrote home from Korea, filled with tender words and detailed drawings for his children, revealed a man who carried his family with him even at 40,000 feet. This balance of fierce dedication and gentle humanity would define his public life. By the mid-1950s, Glenn's combat record was exemplary, but he knew that the future of aviation lay beyond the sound barrier. He applied to the U.S. Navy Test Pilot School in Patuxent River, Maryland, a place where the best pilots pushed the limits of new aircraft. The transition from warrior to test pilot marked a new chapter, one that demanded not just courage, but a scientist's precision. Yet the lessons of his early years remained. The boy who built model planes in Ohio had become a man who understood that the sky was not a limit, but a gateway. His wartime experiences had not hardened him. They had refined a quiet confidence and a profound respect for the machinery and the team that kept him alive. As he prepared to enter the world of experimental flight, he carried with him the values of a small-town upbringing and the unshakable calm forged in the crucible of 2 wars. The morning sun cast long shadows across the hangars at the Naval Air Test Center in Patuxent River, Maryland, as John Glenn walked across the tarmac in his olive-green flight suit. It was the mid-1950s, and the airfield hummed with the sound of jet engines being pushed to their limits. Here, amid the salt-tinged breeze from the Chesapeake Bay, Glenn joined an elite cadre of pilots whose daily work was to probe the unknown. They flew experimental aircraft that had never before left the ground, pushing them to speeds and altitudes where the margin for error was razor-thin. For Glenn, this was not merely a job, but a calling that married his combat-honed instincts with a meticulous, almost academic approach to flight. Every mission began with hours of study in a cramped, fluorescent-lit office, poring over technical manuals and wind tunnel data before he ever strapped into a cockpit. The test pilot's creed, "Know your machine better than its designers," became his guiding principle. Life at Patuxent River was a blend of intense focus and quiet domesticity. Glenn and Annie lived in base housing, a simple 2-story home where the laughter of their children echoed through the hallways. In the evenings, he would sit at the kitchen table, reviewing flight plans while Annie read nearby. The community of test pilots and their families formed a tight-knit group, bound by the unspoken understanding that each day might bring triumph or tragedy. Glenn's calm demeanor set him apart. He was not a daredevil, but a disciplined professional who believed that preparation eliminated fear. His colleagues noted that he approached each flight as a scientist would an experiment, systematically eliminating variables and anticipating every possible outcome. This mindset would prove essential as he took on the most demanding flights of his career, including the evaluation of the Navy's first supersonic fighters. One of Glenn's most notable achievements came in July 1957, when he set a transcontinental speed record. The mission, dubbed Project Bullet, required him to fly a Vought F-8U Crusader from Los Angeles to New York in under 3.5 hours. The aircraft, a sleek, silver dart with swept wings, was pushed to an average speed of over 725 miles per hour, faster than a .45 caliber bullet. Glenn prepared for the flight with characteristic thoroughness, studying weather patterns, fuel consumption rates, and emergency landing fields along the route. On the day of the attempt, he climbed into the cramped cockpit, the California sun glinting off the canopy. As the afterburner ignited and the Crusader roared down the runway, he felt the familiar surge of acceleration that compressed him into his seat. For the next 3 hours and 23 minutes, he guided the plane across the continent, navigating by celestial references and radio beacons, a solitary figure in the vast blue dome of the stratosphere. The flight was not without its challenges. Over the Midwest, a thick cloud layer obscured the ground, forcing Glenn to rely solely on instruments. The cockpit temperature rose steadily, and the constant vibration of the engine created a numbing fatigue. Yet his hands remained steady on the controls, his eyes scanning the dials with practiced efficiency. When he finally touched down at Floyd Bennett Field in New York, the nation celebrated him as a hero. The record was a triumph of human skill and engineering, but for Glenn, it was simply another test passed, another data point in the pursuit of safer and faster flight. He emerged from the cockpit with a modest smile, his hair matted with sweat, and immediately began debriefing with the ground crew. The flight had proven that sustained supersonic travel was feasible, and it cemented his reputation as one of the finest aviators of his generation. Yet, for all his accomplishments, Glenn remained grounded in a sense of service. He understood that the risks he took were in the name of progress, not personal glory. This ethos was never more evident than when he volunteered for a series of high-altitude tests that simulated the conditions of spaceflight. In a cramped centrifuge at the Navy's research facility, he was spun at high speeds to experience forces many times that of gravity, his face contorted by the pressure, his vision narrowing to a pinpoint. These tests were grueling, but Glenn approached them with the same methodical preparation he brought to flying. He logged every sensation, every physiological response, contributing valuable data that would later inform the design of spacecraft and pressure suits. It was this combination of physical endurance and intellectual rigor that made him an ideal candidate for a new, audacious endeavor, the American manned space program. As the 1950s drew to a close, the United States found itself in a race for the heavens. The Soviet Union had launched Sputnik, and the newly formed National Aeronautics and Space Administration began searching for pilots who could venture beyond the atmosphere. Glenn, with his test pilot background and his record of calm under extreme duress, was a natural choice. He was not the youngest or the most famous of the candidates, but his peers and superiors recognized a rare quality in him: the ability to perform flawlessly when the stakes were highest. The transition from test pilot to astronaut would require a new level of dedication, but Glenn had spent a lifetime preparing for such a moment. The boy from small-town Ohio, the combat veteran, the record-setting aviator, now stood on the threshold of a journey that would carry him into the history books and the hearts of millions. The morning of February 20th, 1962, dawned clear and cool over Cape Canaveral, Florida. A gentle breeze stirred the palm fronds as the rising sun painted the sky in soft hues of orange and pink. At the center of this serene coastal landscape stood the towering Atlas rocket, its metallic skin glistening with condensation, poised on the launch pad like a cathedral spire reaching for the heavens. Inside the tiny Mercury capsule perched atop this pillar of controlled fire, John Glenn waited. He had been awake since the early hours, going through the quiet rituals of a man about to ride a controlled explosion into the unknown. The world held its breath. After weeks of delays and scrubbed launches, the moment had finally arrived. Glenn, a Marine Corps pilot with nerves of steel, listened to the final countdown with a calm that belied the historic nature of his mission. He was about to become the first American to orbit the Earth, a feat that would capture the imagination of a nation locked in a Cold War space race. At precisely 9:47 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, the Atlas engines ignited with a roar that shattered the morning stillness. Flames and smoke billowed across the pad as the rocket slowly lifted off, gaining speed with each passing second. Glenn's voice crackled over the radio, steady and professional. "Roger, the clock is operating, we're underway." Inside the cramped Friendship 7 capsule, he felt the mounting G-forces pressing him into his contoured couch. Through the small window, the blue sky deepened to indigo, then to the absolute black of space. The ride to orbit was smooth, a testament to the engineering of the Atlas, though the stakes were immense. Previous test flights had been a mix of successes and fiery failures. Glenn, however, focused on his instruments and the breathtaking view unfolding outside. As the capsule separated from the booster and achieved orbital velocity, he became a satellite himself, traveling at over 17,000 miles per hour, circling the planet every 88 minutes. The sight of the Earth's curved horizon, the thin blue line of the atmosphere, and the star-filled void was both humbling and exhilarating. As Friendship 7 sailed over the Canary Islands and across the African continent, Glenn began his assigned tasks. He observed the first sunset from orbit, describing it as beautiful and noting the layers of color that painted the atmosphere. He ate small tubes of food, tested the capsule's manual controls, and reported on his physical condition, which remained excellent. But the flight was not without its moments of tension. During the first orbit, a sensor signal on the ground indicated that the capsule's heat shield, the vital protective covering meant to withstand the searing temperatures of re-entry, might have come loose. If true, this would mean certain death for Glenn, as the capsule would burn up like a meteor when it plunged back into the atmosphere. Mission Control, led by Flight Director Chris Kraft, made the difficult decision not to immediately inform Glenn of the potential catastrophe, hoping it was a faulty indicator. They quietly began devising a plan to keep the retro-rocket pack attached during re-entry, hoping its straps might hold the heat shield in place if it was indeed unlatched. Glenn, unaware of the full gravity of the situation, continued his orbital ballet. Over the Indian Ocean, he witnessed his first orbital sunrise, a burst of brilliant light that flooded the capsule. He reported seeing thousands of tiny luminous particles surrounding his spacecraft, which he dubbed fireflies. They were, in fact, ice crystals venting from the capsule systems, a harmless but magical spectacle. As he passed over Perth, Australia, the city's residents had turned on every light in a show of support, creating a golden glow visible from space. The second orbit brought more tests and observations, but the ground team's concern grew. The signals suggesting a loose heat shield persisted. Finally, as Glenn prepared for his third and final orbit, they relayed the instruction to keep the retro pack attached, gently explaining that there was a possible problem with the landing system. Glenn, ever the pilot, acknowledged the instruction without panic, though he understood the implications. The moment of re-entry was the flight's most perilous phase. As Friendship 7 fired its retro-rockets and began its descent over the Pacific Ocean, Glenn felt the capsule shudder and sway. The retro-pack burned away in chunks, and through the window, he saw flaming pieces fly past, a sight that made his heart race. He later described it as a real fireball outside. Inside, the temperature rose, and the G-forces built to over 7 times normal gravity. For a few agonizing minutes, a plasma sheath enveloped the capsule, blocking all radio communication. The world waited in silence. Then, through the static, Glenn's voice came through. "My condition is good, but that was a real fireball." The heat shield had held. The parachutes deployed, and Friendship 7 splashed down gently in the Atlantic Ocean, just a few miles from the recovery ship USS Noah. Glenn, ever the Marine, had completed his mission with precision and grace. The safe return of John Glenn ignited a wave of global celebration. In the United States, the relief and pride were palpable. A nation that had lagged behind in the space race had just orbited a man and brought him home safely. Glenn became an instant hero. President John F. Kennedy flew to Cape Canaveral to greet him, and a ticker-tape parade in New York City drew millions. Glenn's humility and quiet dignity in the face of fame left a lasting impression. He visited the White House, addressed a joint session of Congress, and became a symbol of American courage and ingenuity. Yet, in his speeches, he always emphasized the collective effort, the thousands of engineers, technicians, and support staff who made the flight possible. The Friendship 7 mission was not just a triumph of technology, but a testament to human preparation, teamwork, and the steady nerves of a pilot from small-town Ohio who dared to ride a candle into the cosmos. After the triumph of Friendship 7, John Glenn found himself in an unfamiliar role, that of a national icon. The ticker-tape parades and adoring crowds were a stark contrast to the quiet discipline of a test pilot's life. Glenn, however, was never comfortable with the spotlight. He saw his achievement not as a personal victory, but as a team effort, a step forward for a nation in a tense global competition. In the years following his spaceflight, he continued to work with NASA, but the pull of public service grew stronger. He had always been a man of duty, and the political arena seemed a natural extension of that calling. Encouraged by friends and family, including his wife Annie, he began to consider a run for the United States Senate from his home state of Ohio. His first attempt in 1964 was cut short by a household accident that required months of recovery, but the seed had been planted. Glenn's transition from astronaut to politician was not a sudden leap, but a gradual, thoughtful pivot, driven by a desire to contribute to the nation's progress in a new way. In 1970, Glenn launched a full-fledged campaign for the Senate, but he faced a formidable opponent in the Democratic primary and narrowly lost. The defeat was a humbling experience for a man accustomed to success in high-stakes environments. He returned to private life, serving on corporate boards and remaining active in civic affairs, but the call to serve persisted. In 1974, he ran again, this time with a more seasoned team and a clearer message. His campaign emphasized integrity, scientific progress, and a commitment to the people of Ohio. The post-Watergate era demanded transparency and trust in government, and Glenn's reputation as a straight-shooting, honest man resonated with voters. He won the election decisively, beginning a 24-year career in the Senate. It was a new kind of mission, one that required not the courage to ride a rocket, but the patience to navigate the complexities of legislation and public policy. As a senator, Glenn became a steadfast advocate for science, technology, and education. He understood that the nation's strength lay in its ability to innovate and explore. He worked tirelessly on committees overseeing energy, governmental affairs, and aging. His own experience as a test pilot and astronaut gave him unique credibility when arguing for robust funding for NASA and scientific research. Yet his most enduring legislative work was in the realm of nuclear nonproliferation. In the late 1970s, he co-authored the Nuclear Nonproliferation Act, a landmark piece of legislation aimed at preventing the spread of nuclear weapons. He traveled the world, meeting with leaders and experts, using his diplomatic skills to build consensus on a threat that transcended borders. For Glenn, this was a moral imperative, rooted in the same sense of duty that had propelled him into the cockpit and into space. He saw the destructive power of nuclear weapons as an existential danger that required constant vigilance and international cooperation. However, Glenn's legacy in public life is not without its complexities. In 1962, shortly after his historic flight, he was called to testify before a congressional committee on the subject of astronaut selection. At the time, NASA was considering whether to include women in the astronaut corps. A group of accomplished female pilots, later known as the Mercury 13, had undergone the same rigorous physical testing as the male astronauts and performed exceptionally well. Glenn, as the nation's most prominent spacefarer, was asked for his opinion. His testimony reflected the prevailing attitudes of the era. He stated that the social order required men to be the explorers and that women were not part of that world. The men go off and fight the wars and fly the airplanes, he said, and the women stay at home. His words carried immense weight and contributed to the decision to exclude women from the early astronaut programs. It was a stance that, in later years, he would be reminded of as society evolved. While he never publicly recanted in dramatic fashion, the episode serves as a reminder that even heroes are products of their time, capable of both great vision and significant blind spots. Despite this, Glenn's Senate career was marked by a genuine commitment to public service and a willingness to tackle difficult issues. He was known for his meticulous preparation, a trait honed in the cockpit, and his ability to work across the aisle. He championed the causes of the elderly, recognizing that an aging population presented both challenges and opportunities. His work on the Special Committee on Aging led to important hearings and legislation aimed at improving the quality of life for older Americans. He also remained a vocal supporter of the space program, though he was not afraid to criticize it when he felt it was losing its way. His 1984 presidential campaign, while unsuccessful, further demonstrated his belief that leadership required a blend of technical competence and moral clarity. Throughout it all, he carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who had seen the Earth from a perspective few could imagine, and who understood that the real work of progress happens not in a single orbit, but over decades of steady, dedicated effort. The morning light filters through the tall windows of the Russell Senate Office Building, casting long, quiet shadows across the marble floors. In a modest, but well-appointed office, Senator John Glenn sits at a wooden desk cluttered with policy briefs and framed photographs, one of a silver Mercury capsule, another of his wife Annie. Outside, the hum of Washington, D.C. is a distant murmur. This is the world he inhabits now, a world of legislation and committee hearings, far removed from the roar of rocket engines. Yet, as he reviews notes on nuclear nonproliferation, The same steady focus that once guided him through the blackness of space is evident. The transition from astronaut to senator was not a retreat from service, but a redirection of it, a new orbit around the ideals he held dear. Elected to the Senate in 1974 after a failed first attempt a decade earlier, Glenn represented Ohio for 24 years, becoming one of the longest-serving senators in the state's history. His early years in the Senate were marked by a deep commitment to governmental affairs, streamlining bureaucracy, improving efficiency, and ensuring that the federal government served its citizens effectively. He approached legislation with the same methodical precision he had applied to test flights, poring over details and seeking bipartisan solutions. Colleagues noted his calm demeanor and his willingness to listen, traits honed in the high-stakes environments of combat and spaceflight. He was not a fiery orator, but a diligent worker, often found in his office late into the evening, the Capitol dome illuminated against the night sky. As the years passed, Glenn's focus shifted increasingly toward issues affecting older Americans. He became the chairman of the Senate Special Committee on Aging, a role that allowed him to champion research into age-related diseases, improve healthcare access, and combat age discrimination. His own vitality and sharp mind served as a powerful counter-narrative to stereotypes about aging. He often spoke about the importance of staying active and engaged, drawing on his personal experiences to advocate for policies that supported senior citizens. This work was not merely political, it was deeply personal, reflecting his belief that every stage of life held purpose and potential. The committee's hearings, held in wood-paneled rooms with soft, indirect lighting, became a platform for his quiet but persistent advocacy. In 1984, Glenn sought the highest office in the land, launching a presidential campaign that drew on his image as a hero and a statesman. The campaign trail took him across the country, from the frost-covered farms of Iowa to the sun-baked town halls of New Hampshire. He spoke of restoring American pride and competence in government, themes that resonated with many voters. However, his campaign struggled to gain traction in a crowded Democratic field. His reserved style and lack of political fire sometimes clashed with the demands of modern media. The fluorescent lights of television studios and the relentless pace of rallies were a different kind of challenge. Ultimately, he withdrew from the race, returning to the Senate with his integrity intact and his commitment undimmed. The experience, though unsuccessful, revealed his willingness to risk failure for a cause he believed in. Throughout his Senate career, Glenn never fully severed his ties to the space program. He served on committees overseeing NASA, advocating for robust funding and a continued human presence in space. His office walls displayed not just political mementos, but also models of the space shuttle and photographs of Earth from orbit. He often visited NASA facilities, walking through the vast vehicle assembly building where the shuttle was stacked, its cavernous interior filled with the scent of metal and machinery. These visits were not mere nostalgia, they were a reminder of the frontier he still believed in. He mentored younger astronauts, sharing insights about the psychological demands of spaceflight, and he quietly pushed for the scientific potential of microgravity research, especially as it related to the aging process. Glenn's reputation as a dedicated public servant was built on consistency and character. He was known for his punctuality, his thorough preparation, and his refusal to engage in personal attacks. In the cloakrooms and corridors of the Capitol, under the soft glow of chandeliers, he was regarded as a man of principle. Yet, his legacy is not without complexity. During his time at NASA, he had participated in hearings that effectively barred women from the astronaut corps, a stance rooted in the era's prevailing biases. While he later expressed regret and supported women in space, this chapter remains a sobering note in his record. It serves as a reminder that even heroes are shaped by their times, and that growth is a lifelong process. His later work on aging and his inclusive approach in the Senate reflected a broader, more mature perspective. As his final term drew to a close, Glenn walked the halls of the Capitol one last time, the same halls where he had served for nearly a quarter-century. The light through the rotunda's oculus cast a soft, natural glow, illuminating the frescoes above. He had been a senator, a candidate, a committee chair, but always, at his core, an explorer. The next chapter of his life would call him back to that identity in the most unexpected way, proving that the spirit of discovery does not fade with age. For now, he paused to look out a window at the National Mall, the monuments standing silent in the fading afternoon light, and reflected on a life of service that had bridged two worlds. The Florida morning is cool and still, a thin layer of mist hovering over the marshes surrounding the Kennedy Space Center. In the pre-dawn darkness, the Space Shuttle Discovery stands on Launch Pad 39B, its white external tank catching the first hints of light. The countdown clock ticks steadily, a familiar rhythm that has pulsed through this place for decades. But today, October 29, 1998, carries a unique significance. Aboard the shuttle, strapped into the middeck, is a 77-year-old payload specialist named John Glenn. 36 years after he first pierced the sky in a tiny Mercury capsule, he is about to return to space, not as a symbol of youthful daring, but as a testament to lifelong curiosity. The idea for Glenn's return had germinated years earlier, rooted in his Senate work on aging. He had long been fascinated by the parallels between the physiological effects of spaceflight, muscle atrophy, bone density loss, balance disorders, and the natural aging process on Earth. If scientists could study these changes in an older person in microgravity, he reasoned, they might unlock insights beneficial to millions. After persistent advocacy and rigorous medical evaluations, NASA approved his participation in STS-95, a 9-day mission aboard Discovery. The decision was met with both excitement and skepticism, but for Glenn, it was never about glory. It was about contributing to science and demonstrating that age need not be a barrier to meaningful endeavor. The shuttle, a complex machine of reusable technology, represented the evolution of spaceflight since his Mercury days. As the main engines ignite and the solid rocket boosters roar to life, the shuttle rises on a column of golden flame, cutting through the morning haze. Inside, Glenn feels the familiar crush of acceleration, the vibration shaking the cabin. The view out the window shifts from the green and blue of the Florida coast to the deep black of space in a matter of minutes. Once in orbit, the sensation of weightlessness returns, a floating freedom he had not experienced since 1962. The shuttle's middeck is cramped but functional, filled with storage lockers and experiments. Glenn moves with deliberate care, his body adapting to the environment. Around him, the crew, a diverse team of astronauts including Commander Kurt Brown and mission specialist Chiaki Mukai, go about their tasks, the cabin lit by a soft, artificial glow. The scientific agenda of STS-95 was extensive, but Glenn's primary role was as a subject in a series of medical experiments. He wore electrodes to monitor his sleep, provided blood and urine samples, and swallowed a tiny thermometer to track his core temperature. Researchers on the ground, in brightly lit control rooms at Johnson Space Center, watched the data stream in real time, comparing his responses to those of younger crew members. The experiments focused on balance, cardiovascular function, and muscle protein breakdown, all areas where aging and spaceflight intersect. Glenn, ever the diligent test pilot, approached these tasks with characteristic seriousness, often joking that he was the oldest human guinea pig. His participation helped validate the use of space as a laboratory for geriatric research, opening doors for future studies. Beyond the science, the mission carried a profound symbolic weight. Television broadcasts from orbit showed Glenn, his hair now white but his eyes still sharp, speaking to audiences around the world. He described the beauty of Earth from space, the thin blue atmosphere, the swirling cloud patterns. These images, transmitted to living rooms and classrooms, inspired a new generation and reminded older viewers that adventure does not have an expiration date. The shuttle's windows frame the planet in constant, silent motion, a backdrop of serene majesty. Glenn's presence on Discovery bridged the era of Mercury's solo flights and the era of international cooperation on the International Space Station, still under construction. It was a living link between the past and the future of human space exploration. After 9 days and 134 orbits, Discovery glided back to Earth, touching down at the Kennedy Space Center on a sunlit runway. The landing was smooth, the shuttle rolling to a stop as chase vehicles approached. As Glenn emerged, helped by crewmates, he smiled broadly, a man who had once again pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible. The mission's data would contribute to scientific papers for years, but its most immediate impact was on public perceptions of aging. Glenn's journey demonstrated that the human spirit, when coupled with purpose and preparation, can continue to soar well into what society often deems the twilight years. The warm Florida sun reflected off the shuttle's tiles, and the air smelled of salt and jet fuel. In the quiet aftermath, Glenn reflected on the experience not as a final chapter, but as a continuation. He returned to his life in Ohio, to Annie and his family, carrying with him the memories of two distinct eras of spaceflight. The STS-95 mission was a reminder that curiosity is ageless and that contribution can take many forms across a lifetime. For those who watched him launch and land, the message was clear: we are never too old to reach for the stars, to ask questions, or to serve a purpose larger than ourselves. The image of the 77-year-old astronaut, floating in the shuttle's cabin with a gentle smile, remains an enduring inspiration, a quiet affirmation that the journey of discovery is limited only by our willingness to embark.